Hello. Hi. Howdy folks, it's me, Kanaju, and I'm excited because today I get to do a tier list I've been looking forward to for I don't know how long, since 3.0. It's the end of 2022, we have update 4.0, and now I can finally do the complete, the definitive, the ultimate No Man's Sky update tier list. Now, like I said, this is the definitive tier list, so I don't know if anyone else is doing a tier list. Don't listen to them. This is the definitive one. But let me know in the comments below if there are any issues with the definitive list, because, it's all subjective. But if you know me, you know I love tier lists. I take these very seriously. So for those of you unfamiliar, I have my own tier list system here, based on No Man's Sky's actual procedural item classes, if you will. So, of course, you have S-Class. This stuff is really good, right? These are the updates that are like greatest of all time, game-changing. Pretty much everyone loved them. They just made the game so much better. Then you have A-Class. These are really great, honestly. Love these updates. Lots of great features, lots of great fixes. Added good content to the game. Solid. B-Class, of course. These are like average updates. Like, yeah, it added some good stuff, nothing too crazy. Maybe it wasn't for everyone. Maybe it was kind of small. You'll see. C-Class updates. Kind of forgettable, right? They didn't add too much. They weren't that exciting. Excuse me, I have a cat back there. But, of course, C tier. It's below average. And then what makes my list special is I have two more classes, one above and below. So below we have X-Class, which, as you know, in the game, X-Class modules, they can be better than S-Class, but they're more than likely you're going to get one with stats that are worse than C-Class. So that kind of acts as our F-Class, still leaving a little bit of wiggle room for those who believe an update is actually better than I'm giving it credit for. And on the other end of that, we have Sentinel class. And just like in the game, these are really good, pretty much like S-Class, with the potential to be even better than S-Class. But they're also a little bit wobbly as far as their stats go, so they might also be worse than S-Class. It's very confusing. I promise it will confuse you for the rest of this video. But, with that said, let's get started. So we're going to start with a lot of people's favorite update, believe it or not, version 1.1, the Foundation update, added in November 2016. So after launch, this was the first big update that No Man's Sky would become famous for. And I won't spend too much time on it, but people, like I said, love this update. It regenerated the universe, and a lot of people consider this iteration of the universe to be their favorite. But besides that, it added base building for the first time. It added farming for the first time, new game modes. So before it used to just be one game mode, and this added both survival and creative mode. It also added freighter bases. So before this, you couldn't even land on freighters. So, everything was just improved, and of course, tons of quality of life changes and things like that. So Foundation brought the game. I remember when Foundation came out, at that point, I thought it had pretty much reached its potential. I was like, wow, they really did a lot. Fun fact for you viewers, this is an alternate cover of the Foundation update. So this one was never released publicly, but you can find it in the website files. And this one's pretty cool. I've seen this screenshot before. The colors are real nice. This looks like a sci-fi book cover, which is what they were going for. But I think they didn't go with this one specifically because it doesn't really show the new features, right? It doesn't show the base building or anything, so I can see why they stuck with the one they have here. So, Foundation update. Where should I put Foundation? I am going to go ahead and put Foundation in A. It could be S, but we'll see. We'll see if it lands in S. For right now, see, I can move these throughout the thing, so we're going to start with it in A. That's a good place to start. Next up, we have Pathfinder, released March 2017. So the Pathfinder update was another significant update. It was a visual overhaul. It added photo mode, of course exocraft as you can see here, starship specializations, multi-tool specializations, and just a ton of new content. I remember Pathfinder got me really into the game. Like, Foundations got me back into it and I was like, oh, this is really neat. But Pathfinder is when I really started to play daily again. So I really enjoyed Pathfinder. I'm going to go ahead and put this in A as well. Really good stuff. Next up though, here's the thing. Next up we have Atlas Rises. Now for a lot of people, they didn't like this, again, reset the universe. And a lot of people didn't like this new version. I love this version of the universe. This added exotic planets. This added hollow terminuses. This added 30 hours of story content. The Artemis storyline, that was added here. It also added the first iteration of multiplayer. A lot of people think next is when multiplayer was added. Oh, I just noticed my cat's up there. A lot of people think next is when multiplayer was added, but it was actually added here. It just wasn't fully synchronous, I suppose. But of course, updates to base building, portals. Finally, after almost a year, we finally got to use portals to travel around the galaxy. Mission agents, we finally got crashed freighters. Added new starship classes, the exotic ones. Visual overhaul, the game looked better than ever. I mean, there's just so much stuff Atlas Rises added. I mean, I have an hour-long video talking about this. If you want to click on that, I'll put it in the description. But suffice to say, it changed the game. And this is one of my all-time favorite updates. So I'm putting this at S class because, I mean, this really transformed the game to what it is today, in my opinion. A lot of people consider Next to be when the game changed, but I think it really started with Atlas Rises. Speaking of Next, though, we have the Next update, version 1.5, released about a whole year later than Atlas Rises, if you can believe it. Nowadays we get antsy if we go 2 months without an update, but back then we waited like a whole year. But it was worth it because the entire game changed with Next. So again, we get another universe reset, this time the final one. Terrain has not changed since the Next update, with minor exceptions. But this changed all the biomes, the flora and the fauna to an extent. It changed the way oceans worked. It changed space, the way we have systems nowadays, the uncharted and abandoned, that was added next. It completely changed space building. You used to have to build bases on a single little, pretty much like piece of flat land. Now you could build anywhere. What we have today started with Next. It overhauled multiplayer, so now as you can see you could play with up to 3 friends, and everyone else would still appear as orbs, but fully synchronous multiplayer. You had character models, so now you have third-person combat, third-person flight, just complete overhaul to the game. It did reduce variation a little bit, as far as biomes are concerned, particularly lush biomes, but as we'll see, that's addressed soon. It also reduced the color palette, so a lot of people had trouble with that. It was really fun when it first started, then people who played a lot got bored with it a little bit quicker than I think they would have liked. But as you'll see, that was fixed pretty quickly. So next, one of my all-time favorite updates. Changed everything, too much to mention. Again, I've got a long-ass video on my channel if you wanna if you want to learn more about that. But this is a tier list, and we have a lot of updates to go over. So next up, October 2018. This was more or less a Halloween update, at least in spirit. So this is No Man's Sky The Abyss, which, funnily enough, did not advance the storyline of The Abyss so much as just overhauled the oceans of No Man's Sky. And to this day, I consider this a really great update. Yeah, the new biomes weren't the most varied, but they added new points of interest right underwater. They added new enemies, new types of enemies. So they weren't just reskins, they interacted in different ways. You had a new storyline, new cosmetic, new loot game, new loot, new fauna in general. Just a new exocraft, of course. And it did all this, it regenerated all the oceans of the game without changing anything on the surface. So we ended up with the first example of them being able to update parts of ProcGen without having to reset the universe, which was really exciting. But overall, I love this update. When it came out, me and my friends spent 5 hours straight in our submarines, just driving around, seeing what we could see. So this was a lot of fun. I think it was the perfect little update, full of things to do, full of new content, and it really hit at the heart of what No Man's Sky does best, which is giving us new things to explore and find for ourselves. So I'm gonna put the... Ooh, this is tough. Is this S tier? Oh, this is A tier. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, this guy's a real fanboy. Everything he's doing is S tier, A tier. But don't you worry. Don't you worry. Things are gonna change. But not with this one, because I love Visions. I'm so sorry, I promise. These aren't all gonna be A and S, I promise. So Visions came less than a month after The Abyss, version 1.75. And this one fixed some of the issues that had occurred with Next. So it expanded the color palette, so variation back. As you can see here, it added new biomes. So there were a bunch of dead planets when Next came out, and it turns out those dead planets were just waiting to be terraformed in this update, in which it changed those specifically into exotic planets, new exotic planets. It added new building parts to collect in the form of these collectible things you'd find on planets. It added new procedural loot, so you could do archaeology, you could dig up bones, or you could dig up crashed satellites and fight new corrupted Sentinels. So again, new loot game, new gameplay loop, new enemy type. It was exciting, right? We had new fauna because now these exotic planets could have fauna. It added variation to crash freighters, it added rainbows, it made the game look better. Everything about this, I remember this being a golden age of the game. Post Visions, the game was perfect in my opinion. I thought it looked like No Man's Sky, it played like No Man's Sky, it was stable, that's the most important thing. It looked really good and it was stable. And there was just a ton of fun stuff to explore. So Visions is easily A. I would put it higher, but it was honestly kind of a small update content-wise. I know that's difficult to communicate in this short video, so again, watch my long ones if you're interested in all that. Alright, but this is where things change. So Visions came out in November of 2018. Beyond came out in the summer of 2019, so we went back to having to wait 6-7 months for this. And Beyond was advertised as No Man's Sky 2.0. It was going to change the game, right? So it was supposed to have 3 pillars: VR, multiplayer, and No Man's Sky 2.0. VR, beautiful, loved it. Multiplayer, it added the Nexus, which, you know, I love the Nexus, but it did take out one of my favorite features of the freighters, but I'll put that in link in the description below for a video about cut features. But the third pillar, No Man's Sky 2.0, was pretty much just quality of life features. It did include food though, which wasn't necessarily something people asked for, so now you could cook. Added hundreds of recipes, the ones we have today, but it didn't really give us a reason to use them. You could milk animals and ride animals, which was cool. You couldn't adopt them as companions yet, but you could ride wild animals. NPCs could walk around in space stations. You now had to power your bases, which pissed a lot of people off because now all of their bases were unpowered and kind of useless, because now you had to find a source of power. So it was this, I mean, if you thought the Waypoint controversy was bad, it was, but people were also pissed off during Beyond because it broke pretty much every single base in the game, mine included. So of course already I'm pitching this as like a mixed bag, but besides all that, it's just broken and buggy in my opinion. I had so many bugs, so many crashes, so many stutters, so many problems with loading. I remember the game was practically unplayable for me for some time, for weeks and months following this. So it didn't add much content to the game. You just had to fix your bases, and you could melt creatures now and cook with it, but you know, it didn't really add much to do to the game. It was the same universe, although it did make the ships bigger for VR, but it was the same universe, um, the same biomes, the same fauna. It didn't add new storyline, new lore, or anything much. It did add the Nexus, which they took advantage of later, but overall I was pretty disappointed with this update. It took them half a year, and I don't want to sound entitled because I am grateful for everything that they added. And eventually all this stuff ended up being really good, but at the time, Beyond was pretty disappointing. I'm going to put it in B. Now I would put it in C, except the VR was excellent, which was one of the pillars. And it added a ton of stuff. Like what it lacked in quality, it made up for in quantity. I think they had over 200 bullet points for new features, if not more. It was an insane amount of new stuff. So a lot of little stuff, a lot of it broken, but a lot of stuff nonetheless. Now, next up that November, we had Synthesis. And Synthesis was named as such because it was supposed to tie everything together. Because over the years, they'd been releasing all these updates one at a time, and so you're kind of just building on top of previous layers, and Synthesis was supposed to kind of tidy it all up. And it did. I told you that Visions was the perfect version of No Man's Sky. Well, the Synthesis was an even more perfect version of No Man's Sky. It added ship scrapping. It added your backpack personal refiner. It improved graphics. It improved stability. The game played so well. It changed the hologram from being purple to red. It improved so many things. It was like a 10 out of 10 quality of life update. Not too many new features, pretty much just quality of life. It added triangular building parts, I suppose, but overall, Synthesis, it didn't get a trailer. It's one of the few updates, if not the only one of these big updates on this list that didn't get a trailer. So a lot of people forget about it, but for me, it's one of my all-time favorite updates. It was perfect. It just made everything better. Everything stable. So I'm going to put that in A class. And holy cow. Looking ahead at the updates I have coming, I might need to reorganize this. We'll see. So next up we have Living Ship, the first update of 2020, and what a way to start the year. This update is like the Abyss but for space. Before this, I know No Man's Sky is a space game, but there wasn't that much to do in space. You would fly between planets to the space station, to your freighter, and that was pretty much it, and I guess the Nexus. But now with Living Ship, there were things to do in space. There are traders, there are derelict freighters, there are sentient life forms, there's all kinds of kooky stuff. And on top of that, there's now a new class of ship, Living Ships, which they had their own storyline with unique technology, and then you grow them and there's their own upgrade path. It was just really cool. It added a ton of new content, like I said, a little something for everyone, and it's the kind of update I love because it spices up the minute-to-minute gameplay. Yeah, if you don't get the Void Egg, you can't do the Living Ship mission, but even if you didn't engage with that, anytime you're flying out in space now, there's a chance something more exciting will happen. So that's my favorite kind of update, the kind that just changes the minute-to-minute gameplay and improves it. I'm putting Living Ship. A-class is looking pretty packed. Don't worry, I have just the antidote. I present to you Exo Mech. Now, on the surface, Exo Mech looks cool. It was good for headlines, you know, you can now pilot a mech. Great. But it actually sucked a lot. I'm very sorry, Hello Games. I know y'all worked really hard on this, but this update sucked for a few reasons. First of all, the Exo Mech was really slow in its initial iteration. Really slow. It had terrible handling. Terrible handling. You talk about turning on a dime. Well, it could barely even turn on a planet, if you know what I'm saying. It was real tough to steer this thing. So it was slow, it was unwieldy, it wasn't that powerful, it wasn't great for combat, the camera sucked. So using it for combat was really difficult. And then the one thing it was supposed to do that was supposed to be unique was it's able to grab storm crystals without getting out of your Exo Mech. But the problem is the button to grab storm crystals is the same button to exit your Exo Mech. So if the camera moves a little bit and like your cursor moves and you're trying to pick up a storm crystal, it'll just eject you. So that was really frustrating. And on top of that, in order to make it even more useful, they made this one the only exocraft with built-in hazard protection. Which, if you played the game prior to this, you would have known that every exocraft has hazard protection. So in this update, they actually took that away from the rest of the exocraft and made them installable upgrades. So now you had to go and manually reinstall and lose inventory slots so that all of your other exocraft would still have their hazard protection. So it made exocraft worse. It was really slow itself. It didn't add much outside of that, so it didn't add new content or storylines or procedural things to play with. It was just like, here's a kind of a cruddy exocraft, and the rest of your exocraft suck now. So I didn't like this update. I'm so sorry. I'm putting this one in X tier. I'm really sorry. I always feel bad bashing people's work because I'm a game developer myself, and I know, you know, how much work goes into this stuff. But I felt like this made the game worse at the time, if I'm being honest. It looked really cool, but it just didn't do much. But as you know, it got much better later on. But that's a spoiler alert. So, No Man's Sky Desolation. It's now summer of 2020. This update is perfect. Absolutely perfect. It added... Let me explain, because you're going to think this update's perfect after I explain it. So it added procedural dungeons in the form of derelict freighters. That's already cool, right? Procedural content. This procedural content, if you like exploring, unlimited new interiors, all new assets, right? New enemies and things. So exploration, 10 out of 10. Perfect. And then if you like combat, there's new security drones, new turrets, new biological horrors, all kinds of new combat. So that's great. If you like trade, there's new loot, new looting opportunities aboard these freighters, opportunities to make money, right? If you like lore, there's procedural lore, but there's also captain's logs, which tell you stories about the universe. Let's say you're a base builder. You don't care about any of this stuff. Well, a lot of the new parts in these freighters, you can actually add them as base building parts, but the only way to get the blueprint is to explore the freighters as well. So, if you're a builder, an explorer, combat, trader, these interact with every aspect of the game. So this added a ton of new stuff, brand new content. It's procedural, so you have endless variation, and it interacts with every existing system of the game. It's perfect update, you know what I mean? So I'm putting this one, and it also improved the graphics, of course. So I'm adding this one to S tier, because this one really was S tier. 2020 is looking pretty good at this point. You have Living Ship, and you have Desolation. You also have Exo Mech, but we don't, that didn't do too much damage. And then this is what they give us for the big update, the big summer update, Origins. First off, look at this artwork. Beautiful. It lets people know people have been begging for a variation update, for a biome update. You look at this and you just know it's a biome update. You have all kinds of crazy new stuff. Origins ended up being incredible because it regenerated all of the biomes without changing any of the terrain. So all of your bases stayed. But on top of that, it added new planets to the game. Billions of new planets, if not trillions. These had more extreme terrain. So terrain that wasn't possible in the game previously. You have odd mixes of biomes, which I'll talk about in another video, but all kinds of kooky things. New biomes, new interactions of biomes, new fauna, all kinds of crazy stuff that I wouldn't have even imagined that they would ever add to the game. And it added, of course, new buildings, the biggest buildings in the game, the Planetary Archives. Its biggest feature was just making exploration fun again. And the funny thing is, it's still fun to this day. It's been 2 years since Origins came out, and I'm still finding new stuff all the time. And it's because this version of their proc gen is just so much more robust. But on top of all that great stuff, which is great, they added giant sandworms. giant sandworms, the things we'd been wanting since 2016, since the game was announced. We finally had them. It was glorious. And then on top of that, you also factor in, like, we had volcanoes now, we had meteors, tornadoes, bogs. I mean, it's just everything you could ask for was in the Origins update. Now, I'm tempted to put this in the Sentinel class up here, because on one hand, it's almost better than an S class. No, I'm gonna leave it S. I'm gonna reorganize these. Don't you worry. I'm gonna reorganize these as we move a little bit further up. So a month after Origins, we got the next generation update, and this was pretty much, this wasn't a content update so much as a day one patch for the new next generation consoles, the PS5 and the Series X. A lot of quality of life. It added the DualSense compatibility, haptic feedback. It was a good update. It's so sad because I play on PS5. When this update came out, performance was perfect. Silky smooth, 60, no matter what. Like, no pop-in, essentially. Perfect performance. It has not performed this well since this update. So beautiful update. I'm going to put it in B because it didn't really add any content. It's like a quality of life update. If you didn't have a next generation console, you really wouldn't have seen a difference. So as great as it was for me, it wasn't that spectacular of an update. Speaking of not that spectacular of an update, we're now in 2021, and No Man's Sky Companions is the first titled update of the year. And I kid you not, I could not have cared less about this update. I think it was the first update where I didn't play on day one because I read the patch notes and was just not interested. I eventually did dive in and was still not interested. I don't know, I just never cared much for companions. Part of it is the procedural fauna in this game are just real goofy. And they didn't seem like they added that much to gameplay. And the real missed opportunity is they didn't add new fauna to the game for this patch, or for this update. It was just the existing fauna, so I don't know. I know a lot of people loved it, but it was pretty limited. It was a pretty limited feature at the time. As you've probably seen, it's been expanded, so now you can have more companions. You can adopt more eccentric companions, I suppose. But at the time, it was limited to like certain ones, and you can only have like 6 or something. It was alright, and again, it didn't add any new content to the game. Like, when this update came out, if you didn't care about companions, there really wasn't anything for you. So I'm gonna put this one, golly, in B. I might move some of these to C. We'll see. Oh my gosh, no pun intended. All right. The Expeditions update. So this was one, I remember this came out after Companions, and I was just like, oh man, 2 in a row I don't care about. The difference was, when I started playing this, I realized this is one of the coolest things they've ever done. Now I know some people hate Expeditions. I understand. Time limited stuff sucks. At the same time though, when you're actually playing them, having that structure made such a difference. So the thing about Expeditions, this first one, Expedition 1 Pioneers, it didn't add any new content to the game. There wasn't any unique lore in the Expedition. There weren't any unique objectives, unique enemies, unique anything, parameters. It was just the regular game and doing regular objectives, but in a specific order, I guess, and a specific amount of times. And that was enough, I kid you not, to make the game exciting again. I played through that with my friend, and he hadn't played for a couple years. He kind of dropped off after the Abyss, and this is what brought him back, surprisingly. And I just love this update. Again, it didn't add much new content, but earning rewards and starting over actually made the game feel fresh again, because you get to a certain point after a few hundred hours where you kind of ignore certain things that add to the gameplay variety. So even things like upgrading your suit or your ship or managing inventory or trying to find this or that, or even getting enough money to afford certain things. You don't worry about that in a big game, but at this point, like, I'm looking for materials to launch my ship. I'm going through all the motions again, and because I haven't done that in years, it's really exciting. So, Expeditions put a fun spin on the game. I really enjoyed it, but I'm going to put it at B, because again, time limited, so what it actually added to the game, you can't experience it right now. You can experience a different expedition, but you can't play Pioneers. And besides Pioneers, it didn't really add much to the game. So, B. Next up, we have Prisms. Prisms is one of those pretty underrated updates. It's also not a content update so much as a quality of life update. Lots of screen space reflections, refractions in like water droplets and glass, new particle effects, new lighting effects. You could now tame and ride flying creatures, which was cool. But my favorite thing about the Prisms update was that it regenerated all the cave biomes. So this is often overlooked, but all the caves in No Man's Sky were regenerated in the Prisms update, and they were awesome. Like, I did a whole series of videos just exploring caves, spelunking in space, and I enjoyed it. I've always meant to go back to it, but I've just been so busy. But it's genuinely a good time. I mean, if you haven't visited a cave lately, I invite you to just dive underground and see what they have to offer. They're really cool. That being said, other than that, it added the space station cores, which don't do anything really. Got people speculating for years. They're still speculating. So I'm going to put this one in C tier. And man, okay, C tier is looking pretty loaded. I'm going to do something about this, don't you worry. Stay tuned. But in the meantime, we're now at the big summer update for 2021, which is No Man's Sky Frontiers. But I like what they did with the art here. They just kind of repurposed last year's, but it looks pretty good. And of course, the big top of the bill feature was settlements. Now, a lot of people, they don't enjoy settlements. I don't blame them. It's kind of a shallow feature. You don't have much choice. You can't spend your own money to expand things or to get them out of debt, which is pretty dumb. They're really buggy at the moment. They don't really work right now. They're not available on the Switch. There's a lot of reasons not to like settlements, I suppose. But you know me. I love them, obviously. I love them because procedural architecture, something I've been wanting for years. This added it in spades. 3 architectural styles, all kinds of procedural buildings. I've seen some really interesting ones. I'm very impressed with what they managed to pull off. It makes me wonder why they don't apply those algorithms or those systems to other parts of the game. It's so fun to land in a new settlement and just see what kind of kooky buildings and layouts they've put together. Not to mention, it's a lot of fun to see your own settlement grow and see how big it will get. But again, it is pretty frustrating when you build like 7 of the little one-room buildings. My settlement, disappointing in that sense. Besides that, they added improvements to base building, all new building palette, so the old building parts pretty much replaced by the new ones, although legacy players still have them like me. But yeah, Frontiers, I think this was the first big summer update that people were disappointed by. Not counting Beyond, I guess. Oof, maybe the second. I think people expected more for whatever reason. I was pretty happy with it. But I think big summer updates are usually known for having a lot of features, and Frontiers sort of felt like a one feature update, you know? So I'm going to put this one actually in B tier because I've done multiple videos on this, you can look them up, but settlements, as much as I loved them, they didn't meet their full potential. There's so many ways they could have been integrated into the main game, but you know, that's in another video. Right now we're moving on to Sentinel, the first update of 2022. And let me tell you, this was the right way to start 2022. So first, funny enough, one thing it does is it adds a new storyline, which actually works in the settlements. So you have to have a settlement in order to play through this, which is really cool. It adds new points of interest, you know, these Sentinel towers, which are really cool. You can disable Sentinels now. There's new types of Sentinels, so instead of, because fighting Sentinels used to be really boring, but now there's different types, so different hierarchies. So you're having to manage which ones you attack first, and you're trying to keep the healers off of the summoners so that you're not getting too many enemies at once. You have the Sentinel hard frames, which are super mobile, have all kinds of weaponry. Even these drones, the armored ones, have different kinds of weaponry depending on the situation. So combat, instantly more interesting. All the weapons were rebalanced. They added new weapons, new ways of evading combat, such as the cloak. New multi-tool type for the first time in the history of the game, actually. New multi-tools. And again, new lore about the Abyss, new storyline. You could have finally the Exo Mech, which I told you was really bad. They fixed the controls. Really easy to steer. It's a lot faster. The combat camera, much better. It has more weapons. It does better damage. It's now unique in that you can give it an AI pilot. So it'll just act as a companion, like an escort. And it's actually a really good AI pilot. It's like having a Sentinel on your team. And it just made it awesome. It's now one of my favorite exocrafts. It's the one I use the most often, simply because they gave it its own feature set. So this completed the Exo Mech update, in my opinion. It made Sentinels more engaging. And again, it's one of those updates. It just changes your minute-to-minute gameplay by improving combat and everything else. So I loved Sentinel. I loved it. Golly. Jeez. Okay, do I put this in A? I guess I'll put this in A. Sounds like an S, right? But again, I'm going to rebalance this at the end. Once I have everything on the board, I'll scale it like grading on a curve, right? It'll be all relative to each other. So, No Man's Sky Outlaws, the next update here in 2022. Again, they're just knocking it out of the park with these updates. New Outlaw space stations, new quest, new cosmetics. You get a cape, new starship class for the first time since Atlas Rises, or actually since Living Ship. But still, I mean, those are the only two times they've added new ships, and it's a space game. And these had their own unique functionality, really procedurally generated. You can now have a squadron of ships with you. I mean, that's awesome. On top of that, pirates can now attack settlements and could now attack on the ground. Some people hate that. Personally, I think it's really cool, but I've never been attacked as much as some people have had to deal with. It added smuggling, so now there's black market, proper black market, and you can smuggle things from these outlaw space stations to regular ones to make tons of money. I mean, it added, and it added a way to scramble cargo scams. So cool. So Outlaws, of course, changes the game again, changes the way pirates function. And, you know, I haven't even been mentioning the expeditions with these, but this one specifically came with a pirate expedition, which is running right now, the Redux, the Redo. And just a very well-themed update, very well executed. And I didn't really run into bugs with it, if I'm being honest. So, really great stuff. I'm putting this in A tier. I'm gonna have to reorganize these. I've been saying that after every single one. But right now, gosh darn it, I'm working on endurance. This update rocked as well. So, freighter overhaul. Exterior, a little bit. Interior, completely. All these new base building parts, I love them. They look incredible. On top of that, they finally added teleporters to get up to the bridge. Saves you so much time. You can teleport to and from your frigates. Saves you so much time. You can now see your squadron and your frigate captains walking around your base. Awesome, right? That's perfect. It had an expedition, which had to do with freighters, perfectly themed. Loved it. As you can see here, black holes completely redone. They look way better now. Asteroid fields, completely new. Just so many existing things that were just overhauled, improved, polished. This was, it didn't add too much content, but as far as base building goes on freighters, took it to the next level. The same way Next elevated base building, this elevated freighter base building, which hadn't really been updated since Next either. Really cool stuff. My goodness, this is going in A tier as well. Okay, now I would fix it right now, but we have one update left, so this will help us scale it. Everyone's favorite update. No Man's Sky Waypoint. Now, fun fact about this update. It's the only summer update that didn't have like its own artwork. Like every other summer update here, see Atlas Rises, Next, Origins, Frontiers. These all have artwork as opposed to screenshots. And Waypoint was the first one that didn't have artwork. Now that being said, it released on Switch and PS5, and they had this artwork, which is sort of reminiscent of what you would expect from a summer update. Maybe it was a little bit too reminiscent of previous update book covers, so they didn't use this one for the actual patch notes, but you know, that's somewhere in an alternate universe. This is what Waypoint looked like. But anyways, this is the Waypoint we have today. And I don't need to tell y'all, this is fresh in all of your minds, but Waypoint was controversial, to say the least. It overhauled everything. Difficulty can now change on the fly, which pissed a lot of people off. Inventory was condensed, so now you couldn't have as many upgrades. And a lot of people lost a lot of space, so a lot of things they had fully kitted out. Perfect ship. Perfect. They'd spent hundreds of hours. Yeah. Completely nerfed in a sense. It also introduced a lot of bugs to the game. It kind of made manual saves useless, which really sucks. But on the positive side, more inventory. I actually like this inventory system better. It feels more like intentional versus the other one was just adding things on top of things. So this felt more intentional. I actually like the way upgrades work better now. Sorry. Again, graphics look better. I mean, look at this screenshot right here on this cover. Beautiful. Trade rocket. I love the trade rocket. And I actually like that the difficulty settings can be tweaked to your individual preferences, because sometimes it's just like one thing that you don't like, that if you could just switch that one thing, you'd enjoy it. I've seen so many people complain, like reviewers and stuff back in the day, that, oh, No Man's Sky is great, but it gets in its own way. If only you didn't have to spend so much time making launch fuel. Well, now if you just leave everything else the way it is, you can switch, you know, not requiring launch fuel. So again, you can make the game as fun as you want it to be. Yes, it introduces a lot of balancing issues, but at the end of the day, everyone can play how they like. It's really cool. And great for accessibility. So Waypoint, I'm putting in B, tentatively. Now, don't click away. This is the best part, because now I have to figure out where everything actually sits in relation to one another. So Exo Mech, don't worry, it's safe at the bottom. But what's going to make it down to C tier? Companions, Next Generation. And Waypoint. I'm so sorry. I know I just said a bunch of good things about Waypoint. But as far as summer updates go, it didn't really add new content. Although we did get a UI refresh. That was nice. Didn't add a lot of new content. I did break a lot of stuff for a lot of people. But so did Beyond. Putting both of these in C. Oh, this is cruel. This feels bad, but it's true. Okay, so now these are in B class. Prisms, Expeditions, Frontiers. I'm pretty happy with that. I enjoyed Frontiers more than Waypoint and Beyond and Companion. Yeah, this makes sense. Okay, now from A class, I'm going to drop something down to B. What will it be... I have an idea, and y'all are gonna hate me. Two ideas. First one, synthesis. I love synthesis. Not the... Didn't have the biggest lasting legacy. Pathfinder, I'm putting down here. This is the one people are gonna hate me for, but it was pretty much a quality of life update. I'm so sorry. Pretty much was. Look at the patch notes. I'm not wrong. Alright, so now we have these up in A tier. Oops. A tier. A class. I'm pretty happy with these, looking at them. Pretty happy. These are all great updates, honestly. So let's look at S. I don't know if I should be doing this or not. I'm putting next up in Sentinel class. Let me explain. So Sentinel class, to remind you, that pretty much means as crazy as S tier, but it screwed some people over. And what I mean by that is it destroyed all bases in the game. There was a way to recover them, but they're pretty much useless at that point, which is good because, you know, it expanded things. All your discoveries, irrelevant. Everything you discovered in the past 2 years didn't matter. It just saved if you had discovered a planet or not. But all the fauna, all the flora, all the biome, completely different. Variation, reduced. Variation of terrain, not quite reduced, but a lot of people felt like it was. A lot of tech was overhauled and thus made obsolete. It was kind of like a hard reset for the game. So I consider that above S class because I think what it did to the universe was fantastic. It made exploration new again. It set the foundation for everything that's come since. However, it did destroy everything that came before for the most part. And a lot of people consider next to be sort of when No Man's Sky lost its identity. I don't agree with that, but for a lot of people, that's what they say. So I'm putting that in Sentinel class. So here's our final rankings. We have Sentinel class, next update, Legendary, and Infamous. S class, Atlas Rises, real diamond there. Desolation, the perfect update, and Origins, just the greatest exploration update in the history of the game. A class, we have Foundation update, fantastic. Abyss, fantastic. Visions, only good things. It only added variation. I don't get why it's often underrated. A lot of people don't like it that much, but it literally only added new biomes and expanded the color palette and added new features and expanded the variation of freighters. So all it did was add variation. Literally it did nothing wrong. Living Ship, fantastic. Sentinel, great. Endurance and Outlaws. I love all of those updates. Honestly, those all A tier, those are perfect. Almost perfect, right? Because they're not an S. B class, Pathfinder update, good. At the time, it seemed really great. In retrospect, I'm so sorry, fans of Pathfinder. I had one guy tell me a long time ago to delete my channel because I thought Atlas Rises was like better than Pathfinder. Like, I'm sorry, dude. It's not that serious. Expeditions, pretty good. Prisms, pretty good. Frontiers, Synthesis, I like all of these, but they're not like crazy legendary. They're good, they're average, not bad by any means, but not as game-changing as the tier above that. Now, below average, we have C class. We have Next Generation, pretty much just quality of life, 60 FPS match. Companions, and that probably sounds so bad because I know Hello Games worked really hard to optimize for those new consoles. I'm a jerk, I'm so sorry. But also C class. Companions was a single feature, wasn't that expansive, and didn't really add any new content to the game. Didn't reach its full potential. Not much else to say. Waypoint, for a summer update, it caused a lot of problems. A lot of people hated the game after that. Now granted, it was a vocal minority, but still. but even if you take away all the controversy, it was mostly quality of life, but not too many new features other than maybe the difficulty thing. That was a big deal. And then we have Beyond, which VR, really great. No Man's Sky 2.0 kind of really sucks. Multiplayer, it was great, but it took away one of my favorite features, which was the bridge missions on freighters. So I'm putting it below average because it made the game unplayable for me for months. So, and then at the very bottom we have X-Class, illegal updates. Do not install. No, it didn't. I mean, oh, who am I kidding? It made Exocraft worse. That makes me sad, and it didn't add anything in return. So I just remember feeling like we had lost content when this update came out. Like there was less good in the game when Exo Mech came out. So but that's my tier list. Every update 2016 to 2022, 1.1 to 4.0. Now, I know there were some expeditions in there that weren't ranked, but if you're interested in those, I have just the video for you. I can't see this, but theoretically, there's a video on screen, and uses the same stupid tier system I came up with. So if you want to see all the expeditions ranked, especially since a lot of them are replaying, if you want them all reviewed, that's the video to watch. And if you want to see these reviewed in more detail, like I'm talking too much detail, you can also find those on the same playlist, which I will link in the description below. And if you're in just a tier listy mood and you've already seen my expeditions tier list, I recently made a BioShock tier list, ranking all of the vending machines in the BioShock series. So if you enjoyed any game in the BioShock series, or just enjoy watching me make a fool of myself, I will link that at the end of this video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you disagree with my tier list, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I know for some people, my list probably looks backwards, so I apologize for that. Keep it civil if you can. Let me know what you think, and if you're excited for 2023. If you look at this graph, it's interesting. Most of these updates are pretty good. I'd say it's a pretty high quality bar, with only a few exceptions. So maybe I'm just a fanboy, but I think Hello Games are doing a pretty good job. So overall, I'd say we've had a pretty good year and a pretty good 6-year run overall. But that's just one man's opinion. So thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like. It makes me feel good, of course, because I put a lot of time into these videos, but it also lets the algorithm know that, you know, my video is worth watching. So really appreciate it. It's like I always say, I make the videos, y'all make them successful. So thank you so much for making them successful. And if you enjoy these kinds of really deep dives into specific topics on all kinds of video games, particularly No Man's Sky, subscribing's free. You can always unsubscribe later. Just don't unsubscribe while I'm watching. You know, it'll make me feel bad. Wait for me to turn around, if you will. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Bonus video. Hello.